Hey guys, we got a couple pages to finish up in chapter 11 and on to chapter 12. Well, clouds oozed through the branches and hung above the narrow path. Higher and higher Martine climbed. When she paused to suck air into her fiery lungs, she caught a panoramic glimpse of the hazy city miles below and of the botanical gardens, now in a miniature like a village made of Legos, with toys for cars. Behind her, she heard the shouts of children as they entered the forest. She dragged herself forward. Wild asparagus thorns hooked her ankles, but even as she did so, she knew she couldn't run any more. Her legs were too rubbery to support her. All at once, one arm shot out from behind the tree, and she was yanked sideways into a hollow. Martine opened her mouth to scream, but then she just as she'd had in that dream long ago. She was so startled and breathless that all she could manage was a small whimper before crumbling into a bed of leaves. She steeled herself a blow, but none came. Squinting up through the misty darkness, she made out the face of her captor. Ben! He wrapped his arms protectively around her, and despite being small, he was warm and solid, and she could feel the thud, thud, thud of his heart. Martine, called Jake in a sing-songy voice. Where are you? Leaves crunched under the feet of the gang as they hurried by. Ben put a finger to his lips. He reached down and picked up a handful of small stones and threw them as far as he could. They made a series of popping noises as they landed like tiny bullets. Luke shouted out, "Over there! Come on, everyone!" There was whooping noises and the crackling of fallen branches as they pounded away down the track. Martine became aware that Ben was shaking with silent laughter. He laughed so hard that he doubled over and had to hold his stomach. "What is it?" Martine whispered. "What's so funny?" Ben straightened up long enough to point at a sign propped up against a tree. The base of it was still damp with fresh soil. On it was written, "Warning, raw compost tank. Do not enter." It's a really smelly thing. Chapter 12. Martine said nothing to her grandmother about the botanical gardens drama, which had ended with 6 of her pursuers falling into a stinking stew of fermenting horse manure, rotting fruit, decaying leaves, and squashed bugs. Sherilyn had escaped because she hadn't been able to keep up with the others, but the search party who found them had discovered her babbling incomprehensibly after an encounter with a lynx cat with glowing yellow eyes. Miss Faulkner was crazy with fury. She was particularly enraged that no one would own up to what had happened. Even Miss Rathmore lost her sense of humor and said that it wasn't that she thought the 6 had been punished long enough by missing out on the band and the picnic and being mercilessly teased on the bus to Storm Crossing. They would have to spend the rest of the term cutting the school fields with a nail scissors. What nobody could figure out was how Martine and Ben came to be sitting quietly on the picnic blanket near the band, enjoying hot buttered corn and big slabs of milk tart, a vanilla custard pie. Miss Volkner told her that she had a suspicion and told them she'd be keeping a very close eye on them. But as the wrath of the five-star kids, Martine feared the worst. "Well, we got this for you," Scott Henderson said as he hissed out when he boarded the bus, dripping, and somehow she knew he would get her. Fortunately for Martine, ever since her grandmother had found her helping out in the garden the morning after the fight, a truce had been declared at home. So much that Gwen Thomas finally relented and allowed Martine to go a 10-day when he did his rounds on the reserve the following weekend. He picked her up in the Jeep at 4:30 on Saturday morning, when dawn was nothing but a smudge in a star-speckled sky, and drove her to Simbana's highest point, an escarpment densely covered with aloes, proteas, and a shrub that smelled like curry. Cacti clung to the lichen-plastered rocks. The rock that led to the top of the escarpment was badly eroded and treacherous, so 10-day and Martine walked the last part of the way, and the sky was etched with fiery hues when they reached their destination. While 10-day unpacked their breakfast, Martine made herself comfortable on a boulder still warm from the heat of the previous day. Far below her was the biggest dam on Simbana. As the sun rose and her eyes became accustomed to the honeyed light, Martine can make out herds of buffalo, springbok, and elephants drifting down to the water. White egrets watch from the trees like stiff paper birds of the Japanese origami. I'll include a link. Martine thought that she had never breathed in purer air, seen a lovelier view, or heard any choir more amazing than the singing of those birds that morning. She wished her mom and dad could have been there to share it, but it did make her feel good to think that her mom had probably visited this spot with the same surprise. Tende made a small fire and brewed up a pot of condensed milk sweetened tea. He handed Martine some hot African bread made with maize meal, cooked in the coals in a tightly wrapped banana leaves, and as they munched contentedly and watched the animals in the valley below. After a while, Martine said, "Tende, can I ask you a question?" "Yeah, Yabo." "Sure, Yabo. How did you get that scar on your face?" Tende laughed, but it was a bitter laugh to avoid his usual good humor. "It was a long time ago, little one, too long ago to be important. I was a angry young man is all." Martine could tell that he didn't want to talk about it, but curiosity got the better of her. "Did an animal attack you? Or did you get into a fight?" Tende unbuttoned his khaki shirt, and Martine clapped her hand to her mouth. His back and broad chest were crisscrossed with 50 or 60 thick raised scars. It was as if someone or something had to try to cut him into a million pieces. "What animal would do this?" he said sharply. "No, little one. Animals might scratch you or bite you, or even rip you apart in hunger or in fear, but only a man can crush you inside, in your heart, for no reason other than the color of your skin." Martine swallowed. Tende had a faraway expression on his face. He began to talk. It was as if he was seeing something that happened in another land in another lifetime. He'd been 12 years old, and his parents moved from the peaceful village in Drakensberg Mountains to the notorious township of Soweto near Johannesburg in search for work. For many years, Tende recalled, it was as if the devil himself had moved to Soweto and turned it into hell. But it was a hell just for black people. Whole families lived in corrugated iron shacks without toilets or running water. When darkness fell, we burned fires to keep away cockroaches and rats, and armed gangs roamed the streets. He stopped. "Perhaps I should not be telling you this. Your grandmother might not like it." Martine got off the boulder and moved closer to him. "Please, Tende, I want to know." In spite of the hardships of Soweto, Tende considered himself luckier than most. His mother was a trained teacher, and she'd helped him study in their shack. He worked hard and dreamed of one day being able to return to the mountains to buy a farm of his own. When he was 17, he managed to get a job as a clerk at a railway station. He was prouder than he'd ever been in his life. There was only one problem. Every day he walked 5 miles to work, and almost every day he was stopped by the police wanting to check his papers. At that time, it was illegal for a non-white, a man of color, to go anywhere without identification. One policeman in particular, it was as if he hated me without even knowing me. Sometimes I felt that he was just waiting to catch me out. Martine realized he was trembling. "And did he?" Tende nodded. "He caught me without my papers. My mother had washed my shirt and had forgotten to return the papers to the pocket after it was dry. This policeman began to strike me with his stick and shout at me for having no identification. When I reminded him that he'd checked it many times before, he called me names. Then he tore my shirt. I had kept my temper all this time, but when he tore my shirt, without it, I couldn't go to my job. I'm sorry to say I punched him as hard as I could." After that, Tende remembered very little. He regained consciousness. He was in a prison hospital, covered in welts, with a whip that had been made out of a rhinoceros hide. When he was released from jail 9 months later, he found that his parents had been taken away by the authorities. He never saw them again. At 18, he was a broke man living rough on the streets of Johannesburg when Grace sent for him. "It was Grace who taught me that the best revenge is forgiveness," Tende said. "Sometimes the things that hurt your enemies most is to see that you're not like them. Grace introduced me to your grandfather, who changed my life. He believed in South Africa where men of all colors were equal. Not everybody does." "Why not?" asked Martine. For reasons the face of Alex Duprez, as he threatened her, swam into her mind. "I don't know, little one," Tende said tiredly. "I just don't know." They packed up the breakfast things, threw sand over the coals, and headed back down the escarpment. The grass was still wet with dew, but the early morning sun was already hot on their skin. As they walked, Tende gave Martine her first lesson in bushcraft. He picked an aloe leaf and showed her how to squeeze the gel from it so it could soothe burns, rashes, or heal wounds or calm itching. "I'll give you a link." That was impressive, but the aloe couldn't even begin to compete with the marula tree, which was practically a one-stop pharmacy. Not only did its golden yellow fruit soothe stomach aches, Tende told her, but it had 4 times as much vitamin C as an orange. Its leaves were great for dressing wounds or treating insect bites, and its bark reduced inflammation. And that wasn't all. The pit of the marula fruit contained the oil that the Africans prize as a nose or eardrops, or lit in the shell as a natural candle. The Zulus even believed that if a person suffering from the measles rose before dawn, went down to the tree without speaking to anyone, and bit the bark, he'd be cured. Martine gazed around in her wonderment. With every day passing, she felt more and more that she belonged here. It was as if the landscape itself was creeping into her soul. She thought of it as a language. Every new bird called, every breath of wind, every new plant, and every fresh encounter she had with the local people or animals was like learning a new word. Put together, it made up the language of the bush. She hoped that if she studied hard enough, she'd be as fluent as one day as Tende was. "Show me more," she urged him, and he did. He taught her how to identify a multi-layered orange mushroom that was delicious if it was roasted, and how to make a cone of leaves to trap dew or rainwater. He even showed her the toilet paper tree, which had soft fronds, and it came in handy if you were far from home and got caught short. Best of all, he taught her how to make a natural compass. First he selected a straight stick of about 3 feet long. He pushed it into the ground and came in an area away from any vegetation or grass, so it had a clear shadow. When you're sure the stick is standing up nicely, you mark the tip of the shadow with your finger or a twig, he told Martine. Wait 15 minutes. When the shadow moves, mark the tip again. Draw a straight line through the 2 marks, like so. This will be your east-west line. If you now put your left foot on the first shadow mark and your right foot on the second one, you'll be facing roughly north. There's more accurate ways of doing it, but for now, I think that's the easiest. Martine could have gone on listening to the bush lessons all day long, but she knew Tende had work to do, so she thanked him and they continued down the escarpment. The path was overgrown and their way was frequently blocked by cacti and massive boulders. Once Martine was about to jump from one rock onto a soft pile of leaves. Tende's arm shot out and he pushed her back so hard that she flipped and grazed her bare knee. She was opening her mouth to ask, a little crossly, what he was doing, and then she saw Tende's somber face. Lying in the leaves, completely camouflaged by the brown and the grays and the yellows, was a dozen baby bird antlers. Tende assured her that they were every bit as poisonous as their mother. I'll show you. Martine was shaken, but it was the second time in less than 2 weeks that her life had been saved. What if she would have been bitten? Tende smiled. But you weren't. But what would have happened if I had been bitten? The Zulu refused to answer. With any snake bite, you must stay as calm and quiet as possible. Try to identify the snake and walk slowly to get help. Urine, it turned out, was an excellent antiseptic for the perfect thing to use if there was no water nearby, if a cobra spat in your eye. Martine tried to imagine herself calmly peeing into a cup, or even her hand, and then using it to wash out her eye. Ugh, she thought, and shuddered as she remembered her close shave with the cobra the other evening. She resolved to give snakes a wide berth in the future. Tende saw her expression and burst into laughter. Don't worry, little one. Snakes usually do their best to avoid people and seldom bite unless they are cornered or threatened. Murmured Martine doubtfully.